Away there, Dave.
Okay. Well, I got the right one. Well, let me just find the. There we are. So I'm getting used to fiddling this. There we are. So I'll start with the Leinster. I thought it was the right place to start. 500 lives lost in the Irish Sea in October 1918, and it still engages an Irish audience. And much of this has been stimulated by the books of Philip Lekain and Roy Stokes. I wanted to investigate the story and its context a bit more and dig a bit deeper in certain areas. And I'm going to cover the Holyhead to Dublin crossing, Dublin Mail and Rail from 1882 to 1920, the City of Dublin Steam Packet Company versus the LNWR. That should be a recap. Then the shape of the U-boat war in the Irish seas, 1917 to 18. I've made it plural so you can go right round the island. And then escorting issues, 1917 and 18. Third issue is the US Navy's growing role, transport in the US Army to France in 1918. And then the final bit will be on 1918, manpower, manpower, manpower. And manpower in this case includes women. So let's start with on a newspaper. If I was writing a newspaper if I was writing a newspaper on the day after the sinking of the Leinster, this will be uncensored. This will be the salient facts, I think, for that day. 0930, the fast mail boat Leinster is torpedoed and sunk by a submarine off the Kish Bank. Around 770 passengers, postal workers and crew on board, and the split something like 670 passengers plus 22 postal workers plus 78 crew, all ish. And there's a large number of military passengers on board. Once again, 490-ish. 15 miles out from Kingstown, I'll stick with the English names, it's before 1920, and it's the way the records are written. 15 miles out from Kingston on a 60-mile voyage to Holyhead. Ship not escorted. Heavy seas from the south. 20 minutes afterwards, there's a at 9:50, there's a wireless message on the sinking received at Kingstown Naval Base. 10:40-ish, what would that be? 50 minutes later, patrolling destroyers are on scene. Later in the day, 190 survivors landed at Kingstown. So that means we started with 770, minus 190, there's 580 people missing. My initial thoughts would be 770 passengers and crew, no escort. Where are the patrolling destroyers? That's the question to start with. So let's hope we get the right direction. 4, there we are. This is the Leinster. I've chosen this this shot because what you're looking for in this ship is a ship that's fast in good weather and bad. And that's what the ship was designed for. One of the things that strikes me about the photograph is the distance from the deck down to the sea. There's quite a lot of distance there, which I would call it freeboard. So it's stands quite well out of the water, which would expect that to help you in rough seas. Look at the bow. The bow is not the best part of it, but the ship is capable of doing 24 knots top speed, which is about 27 miles an hour. And what you want to do is keep that speed up even in bad weather, because you've got to meet the time set for the post office. Now, next is the patrolling ship. This is a British C-class destroyer, a turtleback. It's called a turtleback because of the shape on the bow. It was designed to give better seakeeping, but it wasn't particularly good. And what happened was, in rough weather, the nose of the ship tended to dig in. On this ship, much smaller than the Leinster, the freeboard is not very great. The speed of this ship, when it was in calm waters, about 30 knots, but in bad weather, it was forced to reduce speed in order, because it was digging into the sea. Not much freeboard, and the turtleback is not very good for sea keeping. So you had to reduce speed. So that means these destroyers couldn't keep up with the Leinster. That's why they're patrolling, keeping out of her way. They weren't fast enough to accompany her in bad weather. Now let's go on. Wrong way. I'll get used to this. Now, it's just recap on the rail and mail between Dublin and Holyhead, the timeline. From 1830 on, the railway and steamship development lead to a popular 290-mile rail sea link between London and Dublin. And Holyhead's geographic position make it a natural choice for the 60-mile crossing to Dublin. 1840, the penny post. The UK introduces adhesive stamps, so you get postal volumes growing rapidly. And 10 years later, the post office awarded the first mail contract with the Holyhead to Dublin to the City of Dublin Steam Packet Company, with the initials afterwards, sea crossing only. 30 odd years later, they seek tenders for rail and the sea elements of the mail contract. The London North West Railway Company, LNWR, win the contract for both initially, which means that the Irish MPs lobby successfully get the sea crossing element back with the City of Dublin. And that contract ran, it was renewed in 1895. The LNWR decided not to get involved because they thought that the Irish lobby would work again. So the contract was renewed until 1917. And let's go on to 7. After the contract of 1895, the City of Dublin ordered 4 new mail steamers named for the provinces, carry 650 to 700 passengers, a maximum speed of 24 knots. The contracted maximum journey time is 3 hours 30 minutes, and they reckon they can get most of the other times across 2 hours 45 minutes. The LNWR response, because they always think they might get the contract at some time, is to order 4 express steamers, similar speeds, a bit slower, but they are able to compete. They also want to develop the line between Holyhead and Greenore, so they get more express steamers to cover that route. The patterns they operate are similar. 2 ships in service, 1 on nights, 1 on days, each doing 2 voyages a day. And the Dublin terminal for the City of Dublin is Kingstown, LNWR is the North Wall. 1 ship, an extra ship is on standby and 1 under maintenance. That's the setup. And let's go on to number 8. The outbreak of war. The Admiralty like the express steamers because they're very suitable for moving troops about wherever they go in the Mediterranean, Dardanelles, places like that. So all 4 LNWR express steamers are requisitioned, and one of the City of Dublin's is the Connaught. And the LNWR switch their steamers from Greenore service to Dublin, so they keep an express passenger service going. Also, the LNWR have a contract with the War Office for carrying troops when required, and they can subtract that if there's a lot of orders for troops. They can subtract that to the City of Dublin. They carry on much as before. Both the LNWR and the City of Dublin operate with 2 ships in service and 1 in reserve. Voyage reported. The City of Dublin have a journal. All the voyage reports survive, probably because of the post office contract. So they're arguing about why they were 1/4 an hour late. It's an excellent primary source for passenger numbers, journey time, weather, zigzagging issues, escorts, ships and airships. LNWR voyage reporting details. There's very, very little appearing to survive. Let's go on then. 9. Now, victory or defeat for Britain and France or Germany in World War I depended on who controlled the Atlantic Sea approaches to the UK and France. Until early 1917, the British controlled them. In spring 1917, it appeared that German U-boats were gaining control. The implications of that were food and material shortages in the UK and no US expeditionary force in France. By autumn 1917, British and US naval forces had regained control. How did they do it? Ireland, geographically, was right in the middle of the struggle. Now, just go back a bit. 1914, the UK was not self-sufficient in food. The sea routes have to be kept open so merchant ships can bring in food imports. Merchant ships sail alone. The German warship fleet is too small to challenge the British, and geography is not on their side. It's difficult to get out over the North Sea. There's a handful of German submarines, but they cause major problems. They're able to get out of the North Sea. The diesel engines give them huge range. They've got an effective torpedo. They're hard to detect when submerged. Some might say impossible. And they've got a mine-laying version soon coming along. The British are slow to develop an effective response. Now, let's recap on the prize regulations. This is the rules they were supposed to work to. U-boat stops and bores the intended victim, the prize, to check nationality. If it's British, they make adequate provision for the safety of the passengers and crew before sinking the vessel. Out of sight of land, the use of lifeboats was not adequate. The British response: arm their merchant ships and have decoy ships with concealed guns, the Q ships. Boarding and check-in increased the risk for the U-boat, so it was safer for the U-boat to attack the victim without warning. And this was unrestricted submarine warfare. So, early in 1915, the Germans declare waters around the British Isles are a war zone, and ships are subject to attack without warning. They focus their attacks in the western approaches to the English Channel. There's a small number of U-boats in the attack zone, under 10. And in May 1915, they sink the Lusitania off Kinsale. 1,200 lives lost, including 128 US citizens, which means they start to become under pressure from the US. In September 1915, they stop because of US pressure. The British response to this campaign is to organize an auxiliary patrol. Hundreds of trawlers and drifters are taken over. They're used as minesweepers, escorts, and for patrol excursions for U-boats. The patrols produce few U-boat sinkings. To show you that, the numbers involved. There are the numbers involved with trawlers and drifters in the Irish Sea. Kingstown, Loch Larne, Loch Swilly, Queenstown, Holyhead, and Milford Haven. 300-ish to 400, 16, 17, 18. The main places would be Loch Larne, 100 or so in each year, probably because they're looking after the North Channel. And then Holyhead is the other big one, 130, 140, 150, that sort of range. So that's the numbers they're in the various ports. Some examples. That's a typical drifter. I think that particular one is from Lowestoft, LT. And this is the cleaning the gun. Another trawler. It's a watercolor and charcoal painting by Holyhead artist Francis Dodd. And the reason I chose it, the gun's similar to the Hotchkiss gun outside the National Maritime Museum in Dunleary. I think it's an exact match. Now, if we move on now to August 1916, the Germans believed the unrestricted U-boat campaign against merchant shipping supplying the UK starved the British into surrender within 6 months. So they start in October 1916, first of all under prize regulations, and then in February the following year they changed to attack without warning. They recognized this could bring the USA into the war, and it does, on the 6th of April, but they think they can defeat the British before the US Army gets to France. And in February and to April 1917, huge shipping losses in the western approaches. And I'll look first at those and then move on to the Irish losses. So let's look first of all at I chose to use a shipping forecast key so I can point out use the areas. So the effects, the sea areas affected, first of all, the western approaches, which would be Shannon, which is just to the west of Ireland, at the bottom end. Shannon, Sol and Fastnet, all around the bottom quarter of Ireland. Huge casualties there, which is why I've got them highlighted there. And their losses right, really, if you say along the English Channel, which would be Plymouth, Portland, White and Dover, and coming up into the Irish Sea, Lundy and Irish Sea, all got significant numbers, but the main ones are Shannon, Sol and Fastnet. I excluded the North Sea areas because I'm really looking at it from an Irish viewpoint. So that's the scale of the losses and where the losses are. Huge numbers, and they've got to do something about it. So let's get the next one up. And these are the losses of Irish-owned ships. What have we got? 7 there, and 5 of them I think are headline. One in March, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in April, and 1 in June. Most of the headlines are across the Atlantic. The 2 Cork ships are more local. Was it 50 odd casualties? Go on there. The British response. The Prime Minister David Lloyd George pushes for convoys. The British Admiralty reluctant. They say they're short of escorts. They need 70 destroyers, they say, and only half that number available. So can the US Navy provide the extra ships? The answer is yes. This is the first US destroyers arriving at Queenstown. If you compare the destroyer shape with the turtleback destroyers, much higher out the water. At the front end, they've raised the bow. So if they're toothbrush shapes now, before they were flat, now they're toothbrushes shaped with the brush at the end. But it means they're much more seaworthy, and they can probably keep up with the mail steamers, ships like the Leinster. Now go on. Now, so they tried convoys. The first trial convoys are from Gibraltar, up from the south, and also across Atlantic. They're successful. And regular inbound convoys begin, followed by regular outbound ones, that's back from the UK, and they're successful. There's 3 convoy escort group bases set up with around 25 destroyers in each place. Buncrana and Lough Swilly, Queenstown, and that's where the US destroyers are, and then Plymouth, which is Devonport. The destroyer escorts provided as the convoys approach Ireland. They come across from the States, usually with an old cruiser accompanying them, and then the destroyer escorts pick them up as they approach Ireland. Also, there are airship patrols developed from bases in Cornwall, Pembroke, Larne and Anglesey. Weather determines availability. Later on, the City of Dublin, the journal reports will tell you how effective, how often they see an airship. Great, that's why the journals are great value. When the merchant ship losses fall dramatically by autumn, and the U-boats have difficulty even finding the convoys in the Atlantic. Go back to, I think we get, yeah. That's an oil painting by Sir John Lavery, who was born in Belfast, trained, I think, in Scotland and lived in Dublin at this time. Gives a good, well, I don't know what you say about the picture. It's well, it gives a good idea of what the airships are like, and a good overall view of a bit romantic though for me. There you are. Let's go on. Now, So in late 1917, because of the success of the convoy system, the Germans switched to the Irish Sea and the English Channel where convoy system isn't used. Just show the system there, just show, yeah. This shows what the effect is on the shipping areas. There's no, Shannon sinkings disappear, so do Sol, Fastnet are well down. All the coastal areas stay about the same, but the levels of them compared with Shannon, Sol and Fastnet originally are much lower. And Dover is about the only area that goes up. And then on to, this is it there. This is the figures for the, how it affected the Irish shipping in the Irish Sea. You recognize the names. WM Barclay, Ardmore, Copeland, Hare, certainly a hit there. Formby, Kernenberg, Adela. The main one sink in October, one in November, and then 5 in December. Ships are all unescorted, all by night attack. If it's a night attack, it means that the submarines attack on the surface. And the Formby and the Kernenberg are lost with all hands, and I think there's one survivor from the Adela. So it's the naval authority, the British naval authorities, what do we do about this? And they've also got another problem. Yeah, the spare City of Dublin ship is carrying home troops from the starts on the 14th of December. It might well be to do with Christmas. So on the 15th of December, carries home 500-ish. The following day, in 2 voyages, Dublin to Holyhead, nearly 2,000, and the 17th, another 1,000, and then across Christmas, 4,000 in 4 voyages. But if you look on the right-hand side, the other events, the Hare is sunk on the 14th, Formby on the 15th, Königberg on the 17th, and it's really a decision time for the military naval authorities. Are they going to escort the troop ship? The answer is yes. So I turn on to this is the following day. This is the day the Adela is lost. They start escorting. On the 1st and 27th of December, 1,000 troops are escorted by 1 US destroyer, and I put DD to represent the destroyer. The following day, they must be bringing the Holyhead to Dublin, 950, well, getting on for 1,000, and there's 2 US destroyers there, and then going back again, another 1,000 from Dublin to Holyhead, escorted. The following day, Holyhead to Dublin, bring them back again, I think, 1,000 US escort. Following day, well, on the same day, back to Holyhead. This time, when they go back from Dublin to Holyhead, they're in company with the SS Rathmore, which is the LNWR express steamer. No information on how many passengers she carried or whether they were troops. You don't know. I suspect there might have been troops. 30th of December, Holyhead to Dublin. 2 LNWR ships in company with the, was it the Munster. And then the following day, 472, well, 500-ish from Dublin to Holyhead with 2 US destroyer escorts. And there's similar patterns for several days, then trooping ends and the escorts are withdrawn. So questions to ask, why is the escorting dropped? And what are passenger numbers on the LNWR ships? Let's go on. Move on now to January 1918. British minefield changes prevent U-boats from using Dover Straits by May. They were working hard to stop the U-boats coming through the Dover Straits because it means they're much closer. It's much easier to get into, say, the areas south of Cork. It means they've got to make a long voyage around Scotland, which reduces the time they attack zone. and the U-boat offensive no longer a war-winning threat. Go on. Now, these are the some information on the ships lost in the new year in the Irish Sea. January, March, up to May, there are ships lost, a mixture of night attack and day attack. The Danish Fallon, that one on the 23rd of May, I think it's the 6th ship owned by the City of Cork Steam Packing Company. So they're not doing very well. Now, in May, the British introduced hunting patrols in the Irish Sea using 10 elderly destroyers, the same ones we saw before, those patrolling destroyers. And there's a gap from May to the beginning of October where the Leinster is sunk, the 10th of October where the Leinster is sunk, and the following day the Dundalk is sunk. All those ships are unescorted. There's no loss, as I said, from June to September. Why? Is it the hunting patrols? Let's investigate that a bit more. Yeah. Let's think now about the transporting the US Army into France. The war starts for them April 1917, and they've got to start from scratch to plan an army. They aim to get 2 million men in France by late 1918, and that army with a similar size to the British. And they have to train their men from scratch. So the men spend 6 months in the States training, and people like Eisenhower will be, as captains then, they will be training them. Then January 1918, significant numbers begin arriving, averaging a bit later in the year 200,000 a month, sometimes up to 3,000 a month. Half are carried in British ships, and they generally reach France via Liverpool, and half are carried in American ships, the Biscay ports. And the many American ships were ex-German ships that have been interned the US ports since 1914, and it takes 6 months to get them ready to run again. The escort force for the Americans are due to be based in Biscay ports, and the main base will be Brest. And that makes it difficult, a long voyage for U-boats that want to attack those ships coming into the Biscay ports, a long way away from Scotland. This is another oil painting by John Lavery, showing the US troops boarding ships at Southampton to cross to the continent. Just to recap, as we know, in April 1917, the US destroyers start to arrive in Queenstown. They're commanded by a British admiral responsible for the area. Then in January 1918, transporting the army to France was going to need extra US destroyers for escorts. Who should command these US escorted convoys? British or US commander? The US decides that the key priority is that there are no troop casualties inbound, that's into France. So they decide US will control its own escorts for troop ships and cargo to the Biscay ports. Brest will be main escort base, and Queenstown will provide escorts if necessary. So that means that Queenstown, a bit of a split control. Their overall control there is from the British commander, for that will be convoys up through the Irish Sea, up into Liverpool. But if Brest wants escorts, then they've got to provide them as well. So in that case, they're responsible to the US naval people, probably at Washington, ultimately. The envoy convoys are troop ships only. They're heavily escorted, and there are no casualties. The returning empty troop ship convoys were more lightly escorted, and there are some casualties, but they've really decided they don't want any casualties on the incoming ships. Now, just to give you an idea of the routes, the U-boat if they wanted to get to Biscay, which would be the short route before the Dover Straits were closed, about 600 miles from the German Bight. You can see there on the middle of the map, the German Bight down into through the Thames, through Dover, White, Portland, Plymouth, and then to Biscay. It's about 600 miles ish. And the best they can do it 33 hours at 18 miles per hour. Probably longer than that anyway, but the Dover Straits were closed in early 1918 because of an improved minefield. So it means they got to take the long route, where you start at it'll be German Bight, Forties, up into Fair Isle. And as you pass Fair Isle, there's a minefield being laid by the Americans across to Denmark, across to Norway, which might take a few on the way and might take a few on the way back. And then you go Fair Isles, Hebrides, Rockall, Shannon, Seoul, Biscay. And that's 1,800 miles. The best, if you work 18 miles an hour, it'll take you 100 hours, which is 4 days-ish. Probably longer because there'll be delays on the way. So it means you've got to take a long time to get to and from the attack zone. Let's go on. Now, just recap now, see what effect this had. These are the troop ships that were sunk in this period. I've highlighted the first one. Most of them are the Biscay area, but the first one isn't it. On the 12th of February, the British troop ship Tuscania was sunk in the North Channel in County Antrim, and 200 US troops were lost. And I'd say that may be one of the main reasons why the US decided they were going to organize the troop ships. They weren't going to leave it to the British. If you go on now into May, British troop ship Olympic rams and sinks a sub near Cherbourg. US troops and escort. 31st of May, the President Lincoln returned into the USA empty with the light US escort is sunk. July, another similar one, Covington, is sunk with the light US escort. On 19th of July, the British troop ship Justitia is sunk off Ballion Head in County Donegal. She's going back to the States. She's empty with a British escort. July to August, 7 cargo ships were sunk in the Bay of Biscay area. I don't know whether they were escorted or not. 5th of September, US troop ship Mount Vernon, once again returned to the US empty, is attacked, only with a light US escort. It suggests that the U-boats were focusing here for May, July, and August, limited time for the Irish Sea. So let me go on. So we go back to the diagram I had before, the chart I had before, showing the Irish ships that were lost. If you plug in, if you accept the fact that the Germans may have switched their attacks to the US troop movements to France in this period, and then possibly switch back to the Irish Sea in September, it makes some sort of sense. And also might explain why the attack on the Leinster was out of the blue, because they got used to the U-boat not spending too much time in the Irish Sea. Well, not many U-ships around in the Irish Sea. Now, the question of nights and days. Autumn 1917, weekly, there's an Atlantic convoy, around 10 ships sailing to Liverpool through the Irish Sea. Many convoys move at night and no lights would be shown. They thought the convoys would be safer. They went up through the Irish Sea in the dark. But this has a problem for the night cross-channel traffic from Dublin to Holyhead. They had to be on their lookout, and mail ships reported several near misses. This is from the journal again. That's where the great use, very useful, the journal. And 2 LNWR ships on the Dublin-Holyhead routes were involved in night collisions. On the 4th of March, the Rathmore, which is the express steamer, with 800-ish aboard, survives a collision, 5 killed. Scott is the end. That's where the book, that's the book that gives that detail. On the 31st of March, the Schley Blumis sank. That's cattle steamer, sank after collision with the US destroyer. So it's collisions are a risk if you continue with nights. We got that right? Yeah, that's right. Go. Crossing the Irish Sea by day. 1st of October, the mail service Kingstown to Holyhead stops night crossings. So 2 ships each make 2 daily crosses in daylight. Total crossings 4. Like LNWR express steamers have also switched to days. I don't know exactly when, but their ships are operate in a similar way. 9 days later, the Leinster is sunk. Escorts or hunting patrols. The question, why were the express steamers of high passenger counts not escorted regularly across the Irish Sea? Well, Royal Navy opinion was divided. Some believed that regular zigzagging would foil the U-boat attacks. A significant number favoured hunting patrols. The hunting vessel had a hydrophone, which would detect the submerged U-boat position. This is detecting the sound from the U-boat's engine. This opinion wanted to destroy U-boats. That was their focus. They wanted to destroy U-boats. Charles Dare, who was the senior naval officer at Milford Haven, amongst others, favoured a different approach, the escort approach. He argued that hydrophones didn't work, and the escorting of coastal small convoys into Milford appeared to be successful. This group argued the important thing was the ship arrived with its cargo, be it cargo or people. Questions, back to the original question. Why were the express steamers with high passenger counts not escorted regularly across the Irish Sea? On the evidence here, the escorting seemed to be a short-term reaction by the British Naval Command to a number of attacks on smaller targets. For example, in December 1917, the Hare and the Adela were sunk in December, a total of 5. So they came up with their response was to escort the Munster because the Munster was in the area. They decided not to escort the Hare or the other ship, the smaller ships, but they escorted the Munster. They had the same problem, well, the same issue was occurred in October 1918, but this time there was no smaller targets to encourage the British to act. This time, the first victim was the Leinster, with no warning. No other ships had been sunk before it in the Irish Sea. So what happened after the Leinster? US destroyers suddenly appear as escorts for a few days, then disappear again. Compare this with the US approach with sending troops to France. The objective is to get the army to France with no casualties. And the man responsible for this is Admiral Benson, who's the director of naval operations based in Washington. It's his directive. That's what he decides. He makes sure the incoming troopship convoys are heavily escorted. He weakens, he's got to balance his escorts. He accepts that the empty returning convoys may be weakened, but he accepts this. The result is that the US system gets 1 million troops to France with no casualties. My conclusions, the express steamer should have been escorted in December 1917. This is the same question again. In a bit more, why were the express steamers of high passenger counts not escorted regularly across the Irish Sea? Compare the US approach for sending troops. The objective is to get the army to France with no casualties. The troop ships with the men on are heavily escorted. If the British objective was no casualties, the express steamers in the Irish Sea should have been escorted in December 1917. Now, let me go on to the last topic, manpower, manpower, manpower. Just to recap, 1914, Kitchener is War Minister, the army grows rapidly. Voluntary enlistment levels high, so are casualties, otherwise known as wastage. 1915, the enlistment levels drop, military conscriptions considered, and this is the War Office view. The size of the army in France is the only claim on the nation's supply of manpower worthy of consideration. Manpower includes women. There's a huge growth in the munitions industry to match the army's needs, and significant numbers of women are employed. And I hope. That's another painting by Sir John Lavery, showing women making shells in Edinburgh. (1916). Male military conscription introduced. They've run out of volunteers. Exempt Ireland, plus the key industries like coal mining, munitions, agriculture and shipping. April, Easter Rising, Dublin. June, the death of Kitchener. Lloyd George becomes war minister. In July, the British and French offensive on the Somme. Army wastage is high. And the competing manpower needs involve the government, the army, the key industries, transport and trade unions. December, Lloyd George replaces Asquith as Prime Minister, and there's a coalition cabinet. I move on. 1917. What's the best way to manage competing manpower needs? The US Expeditionary Force coming to France. When? How many? Summer. More British and French offensives, and wastage in France continues. The French army policy changes. Future offensives to wait for the US. The German army, the British army believes that offensives should continue. Germany is near breaking point. Russia is moving towards a separate peace with Germany. There are Western Front implications. September, the British War Cabinet are near the bottom of the manpower barrel. Lloyd George instructions: reduce the wastage until the US Expeditionary Force is operational. Army say, we want replacements for the wastage in France. January 1918, the army asked for getting on for 1,200 extra men. The War Cabinet recommends 300,000. They give priority to shipbuilding, airplane and tank construction, no British offensive short term, wait for the US. In March, the Russia are out of the war. The German offensives begin on the Western Front. High British wastage. Male military conscription is then extended. Ireland included initially, but excluded after dissent. They thought they might get 150,000 men possibly from conscription in Ireland. But the dissent in Ireland means the British garrison in Ireland rises from 25,000 to 100,000. And that's where I got the book from. I'll show that to you in a minute. David Stevenson. The French General Foch is made overall coordinator. And in August to November, Allied offensive, high wastage still. German army has its own manpower crisis and collapses. Now go on. Let's go finish. This is the quote, a couple of quotes from the book, With Our Backs to the Wall by David Stevenson. Irish reaction against conscription was so ferocious that the authorities proclaimed military rule and increased the garrison from 25,000 to 100,000. In short, the underlying manpower shortage was exacerbated. Go on now. As a result of the manpower crisis, lots of people had to get identity cards so they could count how many they had in each area. This is a merchant Siemens identity card. It was issued in Liverpool in December 1918 for a Rushman, Christopher Herbert. If you look on the left-hand side under nationality, there's a big blot first and then Irish. I can tell you the bit they blocked out was British. But this is a sign that towards the end of the war, a lot of identity cards were being produced for everybody because they had to get a grip on numbers all the time. And my final one, finish with this the only woman who appears on a Siemens identity card. It was for men only, but she got into it. Jemima Fryers, stewardess, born Lisburn, County Antrim. I think she worked on the line between Belfast and Ayr.